The wind sifted through the bone-dry valley like it had secrets to tell, carrying dust and whispers across the plains where nothing green had grown in weeks. Over Dovetail, a western town clinging to the edges of survival, the sun fell low and red behind the jagged cliffs. Wood creaked in protest beneath the weight of time, and the shutters on Clara Jessup's cabin clicked softly in rhythm, like the heartbeat of a life too quiet to call full. Clara stood on her porch with a basin of water that smelled faintly of lye, rubbing her knuckles raw against the fabric of a child's shirt, long outgrown, long untouched. The water turned gray. A hawk circled high overhead. She didn't look up. Her world was small. On most days it shrank even more, to the angle of light on the kitchen floorboards, to the snap of bean stalks in her hand, to the silence that had taken root in her since her sister ran off and never came back. She had neighbors, technically. But people in Dovetail rarely called on Clara, and she rarely returned the favor. They said she had the look of a woman waiting for something, or worse, mourning it, and neither made for easy conversation. Sometimes she wondered if it showed in her gait, the way she didn't quite walk with the purpose the other women did. Their hands were always full, of pies, children, letters from kin. Hers were always empty. 3 years had passed since her younger sister Lottie had vanished down the canyon road with a man Clara had only met once. That night, Clara remembered everything: the slammed trunk, Lottie's trembling mouth, the baby she wasn't yet showing. Clara had tried to stop her, had begged in a voice she barely recognized, but Lottie had left with tears and steel in her spine. Her body was found months later, her baby never. After that, Clara had stopped asking questions no one wanted to answer. Now she watched the dirt path between the fields and the woods, saw nothing move, and returned inside with the basin. The shirts were clean, though no one would wear them. She kept them anyway. In town, gossip passed like wind through church pews. The dressmaker said Clara spoke to ghosts. The feed store clerk said she owned a gun she didn't know how to use. Only the preacher seemed to treat her like a person and not a warning. This was the shape of Clara's life, muted, cautious, and marked by the kind of grief that makes a woman forget she was ever young. She first noticed the man on a Tuesday morning, when the church bell rang late and out of time. He stood beside a tired-looking mule, sizing up the sagging shack near the old water tower. She saw him as she passed with her sack of flour, and though he didn't smile, he tipped his hat. It wasn't his eyes or shoulders or stance that unsettled her. It was his silence, how it filled the air like he meant it to stay. He moved in without fuss. His name, she learned from the storekeep, was Elias Boone. He bought nails, cloth, and black coffee and paid in hard silver. He was tall, broad-backed, and always looked like he'd just come out of the rain, even when the sun baked the town raw. Rumors rose like weeds. They always did. "He's a Pinkerton gone bad," someone muttered at the well. "Deserter," another whispered. "I heard he was chasing a woman," said the widow Harris, and that sent a ripple through the porch like a crack of thunder. Clara didn't ask, didn't look twice. But she saw him again 2 days later, hammering new shingles onto his roof with practiced precision. The sound echoed through her garden as she picked tomatoes and tried not to remember her sister's laugh. Elias never approached her. He simply nodded if they passed on the road. He carried himself with the weary confidence of a man who knew trouble but wasn't looking for more. One morning, a bundle appeared by Clara's fence. Rough cloth tied with twine inside a child's shoe, a small wooden rattle, and a note. "If you see him, tell him she forgives him." The handwriting was Lottie's. Or close enough that Clara felt her throat close. She burned the note before the words could sink deeper. By the end of that week, the clouds finally gathered and Dovetail held its breath. The storm came sudden and mean. Thunder cracked the sky apart and dropped rain in thick sheets across Clara's cabin. The walls groaned. Her garden churned to mud. She lit a lantern and pulled the windows shut, the air inside thick with heat and something else, an ache she couldn't place. The knock came just after nightfall. At first she thought it was the wind. Then again sharp, small, hesitant. She opened the door with one hand on the frame, heart already speeding. A girl stood there, soaked to the bone. No older than 8, thin, trembling, and wide-eyed. In her arms she held a baby swaddled in something too thin for the cold. Both children stared at her without speaking. The girl's hair was matted dark and curly, like Lottie's had been as a child. Her dress was patched and stained. Her lips were nearly blue. Clara could barely whisper. "Where did you come from?" The girl stepped forward one pace and said in a voice like cracked glass, "You promised Mama you'd come back." Clara's stomach dropped. She didn't reach for the girl. Didn't rush. She simply opened the door wider and stepped aside, and the children walked past her like they already knew the place. Inside, the girl placed the baby on a folded blanket by the stove and began unbuttoning her dress. She moved carefully like someone used to hiding pain. Clara fetched towels and dry clothes, and neither of them spoke for a long time. The baby coughed. Clara knelt beside him, ran fingers under his collarbone, counted shallow breaths. "He sick?" she asked. The girl nodded. "He always is." "What's his name?" "Sammy." Clara studied her. "And yours?" "May." Something flickered in Clara's memory. Lottie had once told her, just before she left, asterisk if it's a girl, I'll name her May. Because she'll come after the storm. Asterisk. Clara stood. The wind outside screamed against the shutters, as if the storm itself had come for them. Later that night, Clara wrapped the baby in flannel and heated milk on the stove. May sat silent at the table, watching the flames as if they might answer some question she hadn't asked yet. "I don't understand," Clara finally said. May didn't flinch. "Mama told me to find the man with the scar on his chin. She said he'd help us." Clara frowned. "What man?" "She said he lived near a water tower. That he used to love her before everything." Clara closed her eyes, chest tight. "Elias Boone," she said, more to herself than to May. May looked at her. "You know him?" "I know of him." The baby whimpered, and Clara cradled him with hands steadier than she felt. She remembered Lottie's last days, the way her voice cracked when she spoke of Elias, how she'd said she wanted to leave the past behind. She remembered saying, "You don't have to go," and Lottie's reply, "You don't know what I've done." Clara looked now at the children. Her sister's children. She should have felt anger. Or fear. Or grief so strong it tore her in two. But what she felt, most of all, was the silence between breaths, the space where choices waited. "I'll send for the doctor in the morning," she said. May nodded once. The rain eased just before dawn. Shadows shifted across the walls as Clara sat awake, the baby asleep in her lap, May curled beside the stove. The air smelled of wet earth and wood smoke. Somewhere beyond the trees, a rooster crowed. For the first time in years, Clara didn't feel alone. And that terrified her more than anything. Outside, the path to the shack near the water tower ran slick with mud. And in the distance, smoke curled from its chimney, steady and unbroken. The baby burned with fever by morning, his cries thinner than they should have been, like a whisper straining against the weight of his own lungs. Clara pressed a cool cloth to his forehead and tried not to let panic show in her face. May sat at the edge of the cot, knees tucked under her chin, arms wrapped around them as if to hold herself together. Clara didn't ask questions. Not yet. There would be time for that, if the baby made it through the day. The doctor arrived near noon, a weary man who smelled of tobacco and dust, and peered into the infant's mouth with a low grunt. "Needs broth, quiet, warmth. He's dehydrated. I'll leave you quinine and cloth. The rest's up to God and the woman holding him." His eyes flicked to Clara. "That you?" Her nod was small but solid. He paused at the door. "And this girl, she yours?" "No." "Kin?" Her silence said what it needed to. Outside, word had already begun to spread. A child with no name. A baby too young to speak. And Clara Jessup, the woman who kept to herself, suddenly opening her door to ghosts. At the general store, the air grew heavier. Whispers snapped like dry twigs. In a town like Dovetail, mystery didn't take long to rot into suspicion. May spent most of the day in silence, moving only when Clara asked her to. She fed the chickens without being told, washed the baby's cloths with small, practiced hands and never once cried. That stillness unnerved Clara more than 100 tears would have. That night, as the wind died down and stars pushed through the clouds, Clara found May outside, sitting on the front steps with her back to the door. "Cold out here?" Clara said gently. May shrugged. "I'm used to it." Clara sat beside her, wrapped in a quilt. The silence between them stretched long, filled only by the low hum of crickets and the occasional rustle of the dying garden. She glanced at the girl, at the profile so achingly familiar, Lottie's nose, Lottie's brow, but the mouth was set firmer, drawn from somewhere deeper. "Your mama," Clara said slowly, "did she tell you who your father was?" May nodded. "She said his name once. Elias Boone." Clara didn't breathe for a moment. "Did you ever meet him?" "No. But she said he wasn't bad. Just scared." Clara looked down at her hands, rough from work and memory. "He's here. In town." May turned wide-eyed. "Mama said he'd help us. Said if I found him, he'd protect us." Clara didn't reply. She looked out across the fields, to the speck of smoke rising faintly from the shack near the old water tower. Something inside her shifted, slow, cautious, like a gate swinging open on rusted hinges. The next morning, Clara found herself walking the path toward the shack. Her boots stuck in the soft earth, her fingers curled tight around a tin of warm broth and half a loaf of bread. She hadn't planned the visit, not truly, but her feet carried her there before her mind had time to object. Elias was working the fence when she arrived, hammer in hand, shirt damp with sweat. He turned slowly, wiping his brow, eyes narrowing slightly as he saw her. "I need to talk," she said simply. He nodded once and leaned the hammer against the post. Inside, the cabin was spare but clean. A cot in the corner, a stove barely warm, a table with one chair. Clara placed the food down and crossed her arms, heart thudding harder than it should have. "There's a girl at my house," she said. 8 years old. Her name's May." He didn't react. "She says her mother was Lottie Jessup." Still nothing. "She says you are her father." His shoulders rose, then fell, a long breath pulled from somewhere deep. "I didn't know," he said. His voice was gravel. "I swear it. She showed up 2 nights ago. Storm-soaked. Holding a baby." At that, he looked up sharply. "A baby?" Clara nodded. He sat down slowly as if his knees had given out. "She found me," she said. "But she came looking for you. Her mother told her you'd help." Elias stared at the floor. "I left Lottie before I knew. I never wanted—" He stopped. "She told me not to come back. That I'd ruin everything." "You didn't," Clara said, more harshly than she meant. "Everything ruined itself just fine." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "She's sick, Elias. The baby worse. And the town's already started talking." "Let them talk. They might do more than talk." He finally looked at her, really looked. "What do you want from me?" Clara hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe just to know if you're going to run again." Elias stood. "I ran from things I didn't understand. From the kind of love that comes with chains. But I'm tired of running." "Then don't," she said quietly. "They need someone who won't leave." When she turned to go, he didn't follow. But she knew, without needing to see, that the next morning, the fence along her garden had been mended. Quiet work done by calloused hands while she slept. Days passed. The baby's fever broke on the 4th night, his tiny limbs losing the stiffness that had haunted them. May began speaking more, asking for stories, offering help before Clara even opened her mouth. They moved like a rhythm now, Clara washing, May drying, Elias silently fixing what had long gone ignored. And still the town whispered. Sheriff Mott came by on horseback, boots clinking on the porch as he leaned against her rail and asked too many questions. "You take these kids in out of kindness or obligation?" Clara didn't smile. "Does it matter?" "Depends who's asking." Town's on edge. Says there's a man in a shack who used to wear a badge. And a baby who doesn't belong. The baby belongs to someone who isn't here to protect him. Mott's eyes softened just slightly. "You trust this Boone?" "I trust what I've seen," she said. "Not what I've heard." He nodded and tipped his hat. "You let me know if anything changes." It was a threat, but gentler than it could have been. Later that evening, Clara found a worn journal beneath the floorboards of her sister's old trunk, where she kept all the letters they never mailed. Inside were scraps of dreams, sketches of cabins by rivers, pressed wildflowers, words that rambled and looped like Lottie's mind. One page near the back was different. It wasn't poetic. It was a warning. Asterisk, if he ever comes, tell him not to trust Cutter. He finds people for money. I saw him once, near the house. I think he knew. I didn't let him follow. Asterisk. Cutter. Clara didn't know the name, but it rang hard and cold in her bones. When she mentioned it to Elias, something in him went still. "I knew a Cutter once," he said. "Tracker. Worked off the books jobs. Paid in silence." "Did he know about Lottie?" "I think he was following me, back when I left the Pinkertons. I knew Lottie was in danger. That's why I stayed away." Clara gripped the edge of the table. She didn't want to be found. "She was found," Elias said. "Just not by the right person." The wind howled again outside, louder now, as if the storm that had brought the children hadn't quite passed. It had just waited, circling. That night, Clara found May by the porch swing Elias had hung that afternoon. The stars blinked through torn clouds. May's eyes tracked them slowly. "Is he staying?" she asked. "I think so," Clara replied. May didn't smile, but her fingers relaxed on the blanket across her lap. Behind them, the baby gurgled in his sleep, and from the shack near the water tower, smoke curled upward again, thin, sure, steady. It wasn't safety yet, but it was shelter. And shelter, Clara had learned, was a kind of promise. The summer heat broke with a wind that smelled like iron and ash, sharp, restless, coiled with something that hadn't yet happened but already knew its name. Clara stood at the edge of her garden, watching Elias hammer the last post into the newly mended fence. May chased the chicken across the yard, her laughter small but real, while the baby napped in a wooden cradle Elias had carved with his own hands. For a moment it almost felt like a life. Then the stranger rode in. Clara saw him first from a distance, tall in the saddle, coat heavy despite the sun, boots black with road dust. He didn't pause at the crossroads or stop to ask directions. He rode straight to the saloon, tied his horse without care, and walked in like he owned the ground. By dusk the town knew his name, Cutter. Clara felt it in her blood, the name written once in Lottie's trembling hand. When she told Elias that night, his face hardened in a way she hadn't seen before. "He's not here by accident," Elias said. Clara sat on the porch steps, arms folded tight across her ribs. "What does he want?" "Same thing he always did. Leverage." May hovered in the doorway, listening without pretending not to. Elias met her gaze and softened. "He won't touch you. Not while I'm breathing." Clara looked at him then, truly looked, and saw not the stranger who'd arrived weeks ago, but the man who had stayed, not for glory or penance, but for these children, for this fragile thing they were building with bare hands and quieter hearts. The next day Cutter came to the cabin. He didn't knock. Just leaned on the porch post like he belonged there, the brim of his hat shadowing eyes too pale for comfort. His smile was thin and false. "Ma'am," he said to Clara, "word is you're housing a couple strays. One of them might have been mine once." Clara didn't move. "You're mistaken." "I don't think so." Elias stepped out from behind the door, slow and solid. "You need to leave," he said. Cutter grinned wider. "That you, Boone? Hell, I thought you were long dead or smarter." The silence hung. Clara could hear the faint rustling of May's steps inside, the shift of baby Sammy's weight in the cradle. "Whatever you're here for, it's not going to happen," Elias said. "Oh, but see, it already is," Cutter said. "Girl's worth money to some folks. Not much, mind you, but enough to keep a man like me warm through winter. Same with the boy. Fresh blood's in high demand these days." Clara's hand twitched near the doorframe where the rifle leaned just out of sight. "You think this town will let you?" she asked, voice cold. "This town's full of men who'd sell their own teeth for a bottle. Won't be hard to find someone who'll look the other way." "Then don't look away," she said. And with that she slammed the door shut. That night they kept the lanterns low. Elias sat by the front window, gun across his lap, watching. Clara sat across from him, Sammy cradled in her arms. May wouldn't sleep unless her hand touched Clara's skirt. Elias spoke softly. "He doesn't kill. He collects. Uses fear like a key." "Then we changed the lock," Clara said. "The plan wasn't complicated. In places like Dovetail it couldn't be. They needed to make Cutter visible, to more than just them. They needed witnesses. So Clara went into town. She wore her best dress, the one with a lace collar that still smelled faintly of cedar and long-buried hope. She walked to the church, to the store, to the saloon, where she stood in the doorway long enough for everyone to see her, for Cutter to look up and smirk, and for every man in the room to wonder what she was doing there. "Elias Boone's here," she said, voice calm and full. "And so is the man who hunted my sister to her grave. If you turn your heads this time you're not neutral. You're complicit." Then she turned and walked out, her steps loud in the stunned hush. It worked. By nightfall, whispers flew thicker than summer flies. The preacher visited Elias with questions. The sheriff came next, slower, wary, but still came. "What proof do you have?" he asked Clara, standing just beyond the gate. "Only the word of a dead woman," she said. "And 2 children whose lives will be ruined if we let men like Cutter walk free." Sheriff Mott shifted uncomfortably. "You're asking for something permanent." "I'm not asking," she said. "I'm telling." May stood just inside the doorway, eyes wide, clutching her brother's tiny hand. Elias stood at Clara's side. And this time the sheriff didn't tell her to back down. He just nodded. The next morning Cutter was gone. No one saw him leave. No one admitted to speaking with him. But a stable hand swore he heard hooves in the dead dark, heading north like the devil was biting at them. Relief settled slowly, like a bruise fading. May began to smile more. Sammy sat up without coughing. The garden bloomed again as if the soil itself had been waiting. But it wasn't over. Not truly. Clara knew it when Elias came to her with the box. "I've got one last thing to do," he said, eyes unreadable. "What's that?" she asked, her throat suddenly tight. "I have to bury who I was." Inside the box were old badges, letters with blood-stained edges, and a single photograph of him and Lottie on a riverbank, young and aching with hope. Clara held it in her hands, the image rippling slightly from time's weight. "You don't have to," she said. "I do," he replied. "Not for me. For them." Together they walked to the woods, dug a hole by the twisted cottonwood tree, laid the box down without ceremony, without prayer. Just silence. Back at the house, May met them at the porch, bare feet dusty, eyes gleaming. "Did you make it go away?" she asked. "No," Elias said. "We let it rest." Weeks passed, then months. The wind changed. The air turned cool and gold. Dovetail quieted, rumors fading into stories, stories into silence. Clara planted new rows in the garden. Elias built a table big enough for 5. One evening, as the sun poured honey over the fields, May asked Clara, "Are you going to marry him?" Clara smiled, soft and crooked. "Why?" "Because he's staying." Clara looked toward the barn, where Elias swung a hammer with the rhythm of belonging. "That's more important than any promise." May nodded solemnly. "Mama used to say love was what stayed, not what knocked first." Clara bent and kissed the top of her head. "Then we've got plenty." That night, Elias brought her a box with 2 carved spoons. They didn't say much. They never did. But she took one, handed him the other, and sat beside him as the baby cooed and May sang to herself in the dusk. They watched the stars appear, one by one, as if nothing had ever threatened to tear this peace away. As if silence could bloom into safety. Clara leaned her head against Elias's shoulder. He didn't move. And in that quiet, breathless stillness, Clara finally understood what her sister had meant in her final note. Not forgiveness, not farewell, but faith. Faith that someone would come back. And stay. And in the rustle of the porch swing, the creak of cooling wood, the soft hum of children asleep in rooms once empty, Clara let go of the past not with force, but with grace.